Our next speaker, Mr. Georgio Akiki, Key Account Manager at Total Energies. Speaking on today's topic is Solar Lease, a new business model for renewable energy. Over to you, Georgio.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It is a privilege to be here today on the second MENA Energy Meet. Let me get, since we're a bit short on time, let me get straight to my presentation. I'm here representing Total Energies, and I will be talking about a new business model that is supporting the massive deployment of solar power around the world, which is solar lease or solar leasing. Before I start, I'd like to show a lot of the announcements that we've seen this year from one of the biggest companies in the world, Amazon, Apple, IKEA, Microsoft, making major announcements about moving towards a transition towards 100% renewable electricity. And as you know, a lot of these companies are not in the renewable energy business. So how are they facilitating this transition? How are they moving so quickly towards that? And this is one solution we're going to talk about today. So keep that in mind. Very quickly, I'll quickly talk about Total Energies and our transition from a major oil and gas companies to a diversified energy company. A quick overview of the PV market. I think a lot of people here are quite familiar with the PV market, but the scale at which it's deploying year after year is just, it's always good to see the numbers. And then I'll get to the subject, which is the solar lease business model and its some of its challenges in the GCC at least. So I think most of us are familiar with Total as the major oil and gas company, one of the top 5 majors of the world. Very recently, in fact, this year, we rebranded to Total Energies, and you can see the logo on the bottom left. This is really to showcase and capture our transition towards a broad energy company. So we're not just focused on oil and gas and fossil fuels anymore. We are also into electricity, and namely renewable electricity, hydrogen, biomass, wind, and of course, solar. With this rebranding, and in fact, prior to this rebranding, we had some major announcements in terms of our objectives, our corporate goals for the next few years. The massive one is really to go towards a complete net zero by 2050. Now, 2050 might seem like a long time from now, but remember, this is an oil and gas company of the size of Total Energies that is completely going carbon neutral. And we're even targeting a 40% reduction by 2030. In parallel to that, some of our goals in terms of renewable energy pipeline projects that we are developing ourselves in terms of megawatt and capacity installed is already having 35 gigawatts in a few years by 2025. Of which 75% is solar and 25% is wind, and 100 gigawatts by 2030. So a lot of people hear these kinds of messages and think it's a little bit of a greenwashing. A lot of companies are saying they're into renewable energy and they have a small department in renewable energy. But I'd like to really point out that Total is really investing $3 billion with a B dollars per year in its renewable energy business, and is planning to do so for the next 5 years. The slide you see here is some of the acquisitions we made. I'm not going to go through all of it, of course, but I can just point out a few key ones. SunPower in 2011, the manufacturer of solar modules from the USA, and the first INC installer in the USA. Saft at the top in 2016, one of the companies into electrical storage that has the highest market share for the airplanes. Total Solar created as a 100% subsidiary of Total in 2017, and so on and so forth. We're even buying existing pipelines of some other developers around the world, like Adani in India. So we're moving quite quickly, and Total is really putting the resources behind those announcements. In fact, I showed you some of the major companies that we all know from around the world at the beginning of my presentation, and some of them are our own clients for renewable energy. You can see the logos here, and I'm sure you recognize every single one of them. So far, we have installed 6,000 megawatts worldwide. We have 3.5 or 3,500 megawatts under construction as we speak, and we're already a top 3 developer worldwide. Okay, so let's look at the PV market in general. Again, I think a lot of us have seen those graphs before from IRENA, but it's always mind-blowing to look at them. We're somewhere in 2021, and we're already at just under 1,000 gigawatts. But in a matter of a very few years, in less than 10 years, we're going to grow sixfold for PV. And then it keeps on going exponentially for the far future. And even if you look at it as an annual incremental increase, you also see that the annual amount being added keeps increasing. And we also have to remember that in 2030, we're going to start having to replace some of the first solar plants that we have installed a while back. So that's also going to provide some structural growth to the PV market. So very encouraging for solar developers like Total. If you look at it geographically, you can see that, of course, Asia takes the lion's share in terms of market, but every single part of the world really has some significant increase in terms of gigawatts installed, including here in MENA. So we have something like 8 to 10 gigawatts installed right now, and in the next few years, we're going to go to 130. So that's quite significant. Very good. And so these two graphs really summarize why PV is booming. On the left, you see the solar resources around the world, and you see that there's a huge part of the world that is suitable for this type of renewable energy, namely here where we are based. And also the prices have gone up so much that it's self-sustaining without any help and from the government. Very good. So now that we have the background and the context of the presentation, let's get into the core of my talk and the solar lease business model. So what is the solar lease business model? As opposed to a typical EPC project where you have a client who decides to go into renewable energy, pays a contractor that comes, install the PV modules, maybe provide some guarantees for a certain number of years, and then moves out. In this case, it's a capex-free model where the client does not pay for the investment and does not even pay for operation and maintenance. So in this case, the developer, such as Total, will take care of all these costs and then sign a lease agreement for the next 15, 20 years with the client, whereas the client pays some kind of rent, a monthly rent. And it's a win-win situation for the client because that monthly rent, so the first win is that they don't have to pay any investment at the onset. And on top of that, the monthly rent that they have to pay is cheaper than the amount of money they would have to pay for the grid for the same amount of energy. So there's no catch. The only requirement from the client is really a commitment over 15 to 20 years. And when we look at this DG, what we call DG, distributed generation applications, a lot of people think about rooftop, which is normal, but also we have developed a lot of projects with our ground mount, where a lot of our clients just happen to have a lot of land, or even carports. So distributed generation is not always rooftop. It refers more to a B2B type of application. And in this world of leasing solar power, we either have on-site PPA or lease agreements between us and the client, where the modules themselves, the solar plant itself, is present on-site, where the client has his facilities. Or we can do a corporate PPA as long as the regulations allow for them, because some countries don't allow for that. And in this case, the client might not even want to have the modules at their site, and they just want to sign a clean power supply from an identified source that we provide to our client. And a lot of those big companies that you saw earlier are actually doing exactly that. So what is the business rationale? I think the first and foremost is a clear financial benefit to the client where there's no upfront investment. So it's capex free. It's also OPEX and maintenance free. So basically the solar plant is the property of the developer for the next 15, 20 years, after which it passes on to the client. There's a hedge as well to the exposure, or there's a hedge to the fluctuation in electricity prices, because this lease agreement that you are signing with your client is fixed over the next 15 years. So even though you might have subsidies that are removed by the government and the price of electricity from the grid goes up, your solar tariff, your monthly rent is fixed over the next 15 years. Of course, environmentally, there's no need to push that. A lot of the clients have their own internal and external CSR goals, and we can help them achieve that. And finally, the land value of the facility goes up because this solar plant and this infrastructure gets passed on to the client at the end of the lease term. So if it's so good, what are the challenges? And honestly, you can summarize the challenges really to regulation. This is a relatively new model that is being developed around the world, and different countries, different regions are more or less flexible or have more or less open markets and regulations that allow for it. One challenge we see is those countries that really don't allow some form of net metering or some form of export to the grid, and they really enforce a self-consumption scheme, which is unfortunate because it reduces the capacity that we can install at the facilities of our client drastically, and it makes it harder to really give make the project feasible. So we really encourage regulators that want to deploy renewable energy in their countries to allow for exports to the grid, whether it's full-on net metering or some kind of export to the grid, which allows an easier commercial case. That's the first challenge we see. Storage is not the biggest challenge, but some regulators do not allow storage. And sometimes storage is not necessary because you are connected to the grid in many cases, but it would provide flexibility for some of our projects. So we also encourage allowing storage. Finally, this is the last two challenges are kind of related, because here again we're talking about a lease contract, and a lot of regulators in certain countries really don't allow for a sale of electricity, because they say, okay, there's only one let's say off-taker or distributor of electricity. And so when you are leasing solar panels, you have to draft the contract in a way where you're not really selling electricity, you're just renting the equipment, which happens to sell electricity, and they're quite aware of it. But it makes for a gray area where permitting can take quite a long time. And so in this case, we really try to work with the regulators in those countries to simplify the rules that really help both those clients, ourselves, the developer, but also the regulators which have renewable energy targets to deploy solar power in their country. And sometimes we encourage them to really just draft a standard contract that all developers can use. So we don't have to go on a case-by-case basis every single time we want to develop a project, go to this regulator and say, here's my project, and can you double check that everything is following the rules, and which can take a very long time. So I would say, to summarize, in terms of challenges, we really, the two big ones is really a lack of net metering and long permitting processes. And sometimes I like to show that net metering is becoming more and more popular around the world. Here in the GCC, Dubai is allowing it. So we have developed more than 80 megawatt already in Dubai in only 2.5 years, by the way. So quite quickly, but also all over the world, whether it's in the USA, not every single state in the USA, but a majority of them, in Europe and other parts of the world. So we hope that this also will become more standard and more prevalent here in the Middle East. Anyway, I hope I went a little bit fast, but if you do have question and answers, don't hesitate. I will show my email and my contact information here. And I do encourage you as well to visit our websites that you have on the screen to get more familiar with our work in renewable energy. Thank you very much.
So what we would do, Georgio, is if any questions from attendees, please pass it on to me or email Georgio directly, and he will get it answered. And hope to meet you in Oman then, finally.
Thank you very much, Melvin. Yes, hopefully in the next couple of months. I'll be there, definitely.
Take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.